There is a photograph that the United States government tried to keep from the public. In it, you can see a field, a jungle clearing in the middle of South America, and covering every inch of that field, bodies, hundreds of them, lying face down in the mud, arms around each other, mothers still holding their children. 918 people, gone in a single night, and at the center of that field, there is a large metal vat, half empty, still filled with a purple liquid that smells faintly of fruit punch. The official reports would later confirm what was in it: cyanide, Valium, chloral hydrate, and flavor aid powder, the cheap knockoff of Kool-Aid that gave this massacre its infamous nickname. The man who built this, the man who ordered every single one of those 918 people to drink, was not a monster in the way we imagine monsters. He was charming. He was brilliant. He fed the poor. He marched for civil rights. He was celebrated by politicians, praised by newspapers, invited to the White House. His name was Jim Jones. And by the time anyone realized what he truly was, it was already too late. James Warren Jones was born on May 13, 1931, in a town called Crete, near Lynn, Indiana. A place so small and so quiet that almost nothing ever happened there. His father was a World War I veteran destroyed by mustard gas. Barely functional, barely present. He sat in the house like a ghost, alive in body but gone everywhere else. His mother, Lynetta, was the opposite, fierce, restless, convinced that her son was destined for something greater than Indiana. She told him this constantly. She planted it in him like a seed, and then she mostly left him alone to grow. Jones grew up largely by himself. Neighbors remember a child who was obsessed, not with toys, not with sports, but with death and religion. He would hold funerals for animals he found in the yard. He would preach to neighborhood kids from a makeshift pulpit he built in his garage. He was 9 years old. He had no real friends. What he had instead was an audience. A local pastor noticed him, took him under his wing, gave him books, let him speak at services, and something clicked inside Jim Jones that would never unclick again. He discovered, at 9 years old, that when he spoke about God, people listened, really listened, the way they never listened to him otherwise. More than that, they would do what he said. That feeling of standing at the front of a room and watching people surrender their will to your words became the thing Jim Jones would spend the rest of his life chasing, no matter the cost, no matter whose life he had to consume to get it. By his early 20s, Jones had moved to Indianapolis. He had enrolled in college, gotten married to a nurse named Marceline, a steady, compassionate woman who would spend decades trying to believe in the best version of her husband, and had begun to preach, but not in any established church. He was too radical, too restless, too hungry for something bigger than a Sunday congregation. Indianapolis in the 1950s was deeply, violently segregated. Black residents could not eat at the same restaurants as white residents, could not attend the same churches, could not live in the same neighborhoods. The city was a blueprint of American apartheid, and most of its white churches were perfectly comfortable pretending otherwise. Jim Jones walked directly into that wound. He opened a church where black and white people sat side by side. He adopted black children, 7 of them over the years, calling his household a rainbow family, a living demonstration of what he preached. He fed homeless people on the street. He organized medical care for those who couldn't afford it. He showed up at the bedsides of the sick and the dying. In that time, in that place, this was not just admirable. It was revolutionary. It was exactly what desperate, marginalized people were starving for. Someone who saw them, someone who acted, and they came. By the dozens, then by the hundreds. But here is where it starts to get dark. Because Jones wasn't just preaching love and equality. He was performing. He claimed he could heal the sick. He would bring cancer patients to the front of the church, lay his hands on them, and declare them cured. He claimed he could read minds. He would call out members of the congregation by name, describing illnesses they had never told him about, secrets they had never shared, the name of the street they grew up on, the thing that kept them awake at 3 in the morning. Of course, he had a network of informants doing the research for him, church members who quietly investigated new attendees before the service, who gathered information on their families, their health, their fears, their sins, who fed it all back to Jones in notes he would read backstage before walking to the pulpit. When he revealed it from up front, the congregation came undone. People wept. People fell to their knees. People who had grown up skeptical, people who had every reason not to trust anyone, believed in that moment that they were standing in the presence of something divine. He was giving them the most addictive substance on earth. Not God, not community, not even love. Certainty. The certainty that someone knew the truth, that someone had the answers, that if you stayed close to that person, if you gave them your loyalty and your obedience, and eventually your entire life, you would be safe. It is the oldest lie in human history, and Jim Jones had perfected it. By the mid-1960s, Jones had a following large enough and an ego ambitious enough that Indianapolis could no longer contain him. He moved his congregation west, first to a small town called Ukiah in Northern California, then down to San Francisco, then to Los Angeles. The People's Temple exploded. In San Francisco, Jones became a political force. Politicians lined up to have their photograph taken with him. His congregation, which had grown to several thousand, was a disciplined, organized voting bloc who showed up when he told them to show up and voted how he told them to vote. The mayor of San Francisco, George Moscone, counted on Jones's support and delivered city contracts in return. A city supervisor named Harvey Milk praised Jones publicly as a man of the highest character. Governor Jerry Brown met with him. President Carter's wife, Rosalind, wrote him a letter. The San Francisco Chronicle called the People's Temple a model of social change. None of them looked closely enough, because behind the gleaming public facade, behind the food programs and the drug rehabilitation work and the integrated congregation, something else entirely was happening inside the People's Temple, something that had been happening for years, growing quietly in the dark. Members were required to sign over their assets to the church, their homes, their bank accounts, their paychecks, everything. Jones called it living communally. He called it putting the collective above the individual. It was control. It was making sure that if anyone ever wanted to leave, they would have nothing to leave with. Members were required to write letters, confessions, Jones called them, detailing the worst things they had ever done, the most shameful moments of their lives, sexual acts, crimes, betrayals. These letters were kept in files, and when a member started asking difficult questions or talking about leaving, those letters became leverage. Either you stay or your family finds out what you wrote, your employer, your community. Former members described a ritual called the White Night. In the middle of the night, 2, 3 in the morning, the settlement's loudspeakers would blast a siren. Everyone was required to assemble immediately. Jones would appear before them, sweating, his eyes glazed, his speech slow and slurred from the cocktail of drugs he had become dependent on. Demerol, quaaludes, amphetamines, barbiturates. And he would announce that the end was near, that enemies had surrounded them, that death was coming. Members would be handed a drink and told it was poisoned, and they would drink it. Every time, without being forced. They would drink it because by that point, the months and years of conditioning had done their work. The boundary between trusting Jim Jones and trusting their own survival instincts had been so thoroughly erased that drinking poison on his command felt like the rational choice. When they didn't die, Jones would tell them it had been a test of their loyalty and commitment, and they had passed. And they would go back to their beds, shaking, and tell themselves that this was what devotion looked like. He ran these drills over and over. Each time, the threshold moved a little lower. Each time, the unthinkable became a little more thinkable. He was not preparing them to die. He was preparing them to be willing to die. There is a difference, and by the time it mattered, that difference was gone. In 1977, a magazine called New West published an investigation into the People's Temple. Former members spoke on record for the first time. They described systematic beatings, children disciplined with electric cattle prods, elderly members having their Social Security checks confiscated every month, people held in isolation for weeks as punishment for minor infractions, a leader who had stopped being a preacher and become something that resembled a warlord, irrational, paranoid, dependent on drugs, and surrounded by followers too terrified to tell him so. Jones read an advance copy of the article. He had enough political connections to know it was coming. He understood immediately what it meant. And he made the decision that would seal the fate of everyone who trusted him. He told his congregation that America was too dangerous for them now, that the government was coming, that the only safe place left on earth was the settlement he had been quietly building for years in the jungle of Guyana, a small South American country with a weak government and almost no American oversight. He called it Jonestown. He told them it was paradise. Over 1,000 people packed their lives into boxes and got on planes. The first months in Jonestown were hard but bearable. Members worked the fields, built structures, raised crops in soil that was not particularly cooperative. There was a school for the children. There was a medical facility. There were communal meals and communal meetings, and the constant presence of Jim Jones on the loudspeakers that had been mounted on poles throughout every corner of the settlement. But Guyana is not California. The heat was punishing and constant. The jungle surrounded the clearing on all sides like a wall. There were no telephones available to ordinary members, no newspapers from outside, no contact with the world beyond Jonestown that Jones did not personally approve and monitor. Family members who wrote letters had those letters read before they were delivered, and some never delivered at all. Armed guards patrolled the edges of the settlement. They were not there to protect residents from outside threats. They were there to prevent residents from leaving. By mid-1978, the situation had become something that no longer resembled even the distorted version of utopia Jones had promised. Food rations had been cut dramatically. Members were surviving on rice and gravy, sometimes less. People were getting sick with diseases that adequate nutrition and medical care could have prevented. Children who acted out were subjected to punishments that would have constituted criminal child abuse anywhere with a functioning legal system. And Jones himself had become almost unrecognizable. He spent most of his days in his cabin, injecting himself with drugs, emerging only to conduct the all-night meetings where he would rant for hours about the CIA, about fascism, about the enemies who were coming to destroy everything he had built. His inner circle covered for him. They managed the settlement day to day, while their leader deteriorated in private. Some members managed to smuggle letters out of Jonestown, hidden inside packages, passed to the rare outside visitor, carried out by the occasional defector who managed to escape. The letters described what was happening inside, the hunger, the fear, the guards, the punishments. They described people who had realized too late that they were not living in a utopia, that they were prisoners, that they had given their entire lives to a man who had never intended to keep his promises. These letters eventually reached a congressman named Leo Ryan. Ryan was 53 years old and represented a district in California that included many former People's Temple members and many relatives of current ones. He was not a politician who was satisfied with written reports. He had gone undercover in a California state prison to document conditions there. He had a reputation for going to see things with his own eyes. He read the letters. He met with worried families. He requested a visa for Guyana. And on November 14, 1978, he boarded a plane south, accompanied by congressional staffers, journalists from NBC and the San Francisco Press, and a group of Jonestown relatives who had not heard from their families in months. Jones refused them entry for days, stalling from his compound while the delegation sat in Georgetown. Finally, on November 17th, he relented. The compound had been prepared, cleaned. Residents had been briefed on how to behave, what to say, which stories to tell and which ones never to mention. There was a welcome dinner, music, members of the congregation performed. Everything looked, to someone who had never seen the inside of a cult, like exactly what Jones had always claimed it was. Ryan gave a short speech. He said that from what he had seen, there were people here who seemed to believe this was the best thing that had ever happened to them. The crowd applauded. Jones smiled from the front of the room. That night, as the journalists toured the compound with cameras running, the cracks appeared. Notes, tiny pieces of paper, folded small, slipped under tables, pressed into open hands, tucked inside handshakes, all of them saying the same thing in different handwriting. Get us out. We want to leave. Please don't go without us. By the morning of November 18th, 16 people had formally asked to leave with Ryan's group. Then the number became 20, then 30. Then more were coming forward. Jones watched his congregation choosing to walk away, and something inside him, some final restraint, some last remaining calculation, gave way completely. One of his lieutenants rushed Congressman Ryan with a knife in the middle of the pavilion. Ryan pulled free. He was not badly hurt, but the performance was over. The mask was on the floor. Ryan gathered everyone, staffers, journalists, defectors, and they drove to the Port Kaituma airstrip. 2 small charter planes were waiting on the runway. They began loading their bags. The trucks arrived. Jones had sent them. Armed guards, members of his inner security team. They climbed out of the vehicles and opened fire without a word. Leo Ryan was shot more than 20 times. He died on that runway and became the only sitting member of the United States Congress ever to be killed in the line of duty. 3 journalists died beside him: a photographer, a reporter, a cameraman who kept his camera on his shoulder and kept filming until the bullet took him. 9 others were wounded. Some hid in the jungle. Some lay still in the grass and let the guards believe they were already dead. Back in Jonestown, Jim Jones summoned everyone to the pavilion. It was late afternoon. The light through the jungle canopy was turning gold. More than 900 people assembled in the open-sided structure at the center of the compound, the same place where they had eaten together, celebrated together, been screamed at together for years. The recording exists. The FBI catalogued it as Q042. It is 44 minutes long, and it is freely available. It may be the most disturbing audio document in American history. On the tape, Jones speaks slowly, heavily. The drugs are audible in his voice. The slur, the pauses, the way certain words come out wrong. He tells his congregation that the congressman is dead. He tells them that enemies are coming. He tells them it is time to die with dignity. He calls it revolutionary suicide. He says it is the ultimate protest against a system that was never going to let them live free. You can hear people crying. You can hear people agreeing. And then you can hear a woman's voice rising above the rest. Her name was Christine Miller. She stood up in that pavilion and she argued. She said they could go to Russia. Jones had always claimed the Soviet Union would welcome them. She said there was another way. She said the children deserved a chance. The crowd turned on her. Jones talked over her, dismissing her, and the congregation shouted her down. Christine Miller, who may have been the bravest person in that field, eventually fell quiet. A vat was carried to the center of the pavilion. Nurses poured in the flavor aid, then the cyanide, then the sedatives, then the tranquilizers. They stirred it and filled paper cups. The children were brought forward first. Parents held their infants. Nurses moved through the crowd with syringes, squirting the mixture into the mouths of babies who couldn't understand what was happening to them, who had been born in that compound and had never seen anything beyond its borders. The children died in their parents' arms, and then the adults drank. Some chose it, genuinely, in the way that years of conditioning and isolation and the systematic destruction of independent thought produces something that looks like a choice. Some were held down and injected by guards. Some tried to run and were stopped. Some screamed. The guards had orders to shoot anyone who fled into the jungle. Jim Jones was found dead in a chair near the pavilion. One bullet wound to the head. No one has ever established with certainty whether he pulled the trigger or had someone do it for him. Given everything else, it probably doesn't matter. He was 47 years old. 909 people died in Jonestown that day. 4 more died in Georgetown. Total dead, 918. Of those, 304 were children. The survivors, fewer than 100. Most of them people who had been away from the compound for other reasons that day, have spent the decades since trying to answer the question everyone asks. How? How does a man convince 900 people to die for him? The answer that the question implies, that those people must have been ignorant or weak or simply foolish, is wrong. The People's Temple was full of teachers and nurses and veterans and college graduates, people who had marched in protests and read books and built careers. Idealistic, thoughtful people who genuinely wanted to make the world more fair. Jones found them at the precise intersection of hope and exhaustion. He offered them a community when they were lonely, a purpose when they felt powerless, an explanation for everything that had ever hurt them. He gave them belonging, which is perhaps the most powerful force in human psychology. More powerful than reason, more powerful than self-preservation when it has been carefully cultivated over years. And then he isolated them. Slowly. One rule at a time, one restriction at a time, one border moved so gradually that no single moment felt like the moment to resist. By the time the full shape of what he had built became visible, they were in a jungle with no passports, no money, no way home, and the absolute certainty, drilled into them through years of white night rehearsals, that the outside world was worse. This is not a story about stupidity. It is a story about the most sophisticated and ancient form of human predation. A person who understood that the deepest human need is to believe that someone, somewhere, has the answers, and who was willing to exploit that need until there was nothing left to exploit. Jonestown was dismantled. The jungle grew back over it. Today, the clearing in Guyana is almost invisible from the air. A few concrete foundations, a rusted water tower, vines covering everything. The phrase "drink the Kool-Aid" became a joke, a casual way to describe someone who believes something uncritically. People say it at work meetings. They say it about sports teams and political parties. They almost never remember where it came from. It came from here, from that vat, from those 44 minutes of tape, from a man who looked at 900 people who had trusted him completely, including 304 children who had never been given a choice, and decided that his legacy mattered more than their lives. If you want to understand how this happens, if you want to understand the psychology behind it, the warning signs that were there from the beginning, and why intelligent people miss them every single time, stay with this channel, because Jonestown is not the darkest story we have. It is just the first.